My name is Dan McCardle, and we're at 1+1=1 Gallery here in downtown Helena. This is my first ever show of my work, so I'm really excited about that. I'm a wood carver. I came to wood carving through my childhood. I was introduced to carving tools as a kid, and I kept that with me all throughout my mid-adult. I've always loved to draw too, and as I reach midlife, I'm sort of bringing two arcs of my interests together at this point. I've been a woodworker for so many years. I've been an avid drawer all along as well, so at this point, my drawing in color and my woodworking have come together with color and relief carved wood. When I was a kid, I was drawing all the time. I'd spend entire summers at an art table, just piled with paints and crayons and pencils. And I took that into my early adolescence and continued to study. I'm from New York City originally, well, just outside of the city. And I took classes in New York City, and I learned a lot. There's a lot of really gifted people there. However, over time, I just realized that the urban environment wasn't really what inspired me. And after a while, I just came out west and found a more direct inspiration with nature. So I love getting outdoors. I ski, I hike, I walk with my kids, I bike, and every time I'm outside, I'm looking for patterns in nature. I just can't help it at this point. I'm looking at grass, I'm looking at patterns of rocks, looking to see what will work with carved wood. I think my first sort of real long-term effort at producing a finished carving was back in 2000, about 15, 16 years ago. And I was in upstate New York, and the trees in upstate New York offer a huge variety of leaf types. And one of my favorite trees in upstate New York is the white oak. And it has a special leaf that's deeply lobed. Each leaf is like a snowflake. Each leaf is completely unique. And it gave a lot of opportunity for texture. So I've always come back to leaves as an inspiration for texture and layering and patterning. So many of my carvings, I assemble a whole forest floor of leaves, where leaves are layered upon each other, where you can explore subtle shades of color and shadow with leaves. They're so thin. So I've gone from maple leaves, I've gone from oak leaves to maple leaves. These maple leaves that I've carved for my Pacific big leaf maple, that's actually a life-size rendition of this leaf. It's a pretty special leaf. If you ever go to the northwest coast of North America, over in Bellingham, Washington, up into British Columbia, these leaves can get huge, and they're sort of a charismatic leaf. They just have deep lobes, and in the fall, when things begin to rot and they begin to fall off, the colors are really spectacular. They're not like back east where you traditionally have the famous fall color, but the leaves in the mountains in the northwest US, they sort of mix the yellows and the oranges and sort of the decay and the brown and the gray. I guess the time of year I notice ravens most is in the winter. I go down to West Yellowstone to ski, or if I'm up on a high mountain pass on my skis, they're usually the only birds out in the wintertime. And with the snow, they're pretty remarkable, especially when you get close. If anyone's been close to a raven in the winter, you're just stunned at how large they are and how much personality they have and how sort of scruffy and wild they are. The black on white is just something that was too good to pass up. attempt to put on wood for me. So since I've developed sort of an interest and a technique with the dyes, I thought it was a perfect time to sort of bring the ravens in and into my work and see what I could do with them. So I started experimenting with black. So this has some black on it. It has blue, it has purple, it has brown, and I just soak them all deeply on top of each other. So it's a process of adding and subtracting. I mean, my first layer will be a deeply soaked water base of black, and then maybe I'll add more blue, and the blue might actually sink deeper into the black, so that when I sand off some of the black, the blue comes out. And if anybody's been lucky enough to catch a raven in the right light, they will show you some blue on their tails and some blue on their feathers. It's pretty remarkable. So it's really fun to do ravens and to get the feedback from people that see them, because everybody seems to have their own personal relationship with this bird. People have their own stories as to why the raven is sort of their bird for them. And everybody's story is different, but everybody's story is really close to their heart about this bird. So, a lot of people carve hawks and eagles and things like that, and that's sort of a Western icon, the predator birds. But the raven is sort of more of a subtle, mysterious, almost I don't know. It's not really an underdog, but it's got some secrets that maybe the birds of prey don't have. And it's also probably a lot tougher. I mean, like I said, when I'm in really harsh environments where the wind's howling, 40 miles per hour on a ridge top, and the wind is blowing, and the snow is reducing visibility, the raven's the only bird you'll see out there, and they're just having fun, and they're talking to each other. So you go to a harsh environment, they'll be there to keep you company. When I first started with the idea of drawing and carving fish on stones, and the idea is pretty obvious to you if you're a fisherman. It's sort of a pretty special place to be when you're in the morning light, walking up a stream with your rod in your hand and just looking through 6-8 inches of crystal clear water and having all the movement of the sunlight on the stones. The idea was pretty vivid for me, and I began with plain unpainted wood with this idea. So I really tried to rely on how light and shadow played on the wood. So here's an example of a piece where I'm a few days into it. It represents sort of the most physically rigorous part of my producing one of these carvings. But it does show all the different stages. So if we look down here, this is pretty much how I start all my carvings, with just a blank piece of wood and a pencil. And I just start to visualize the pattern, and I'll draw directly on wood. I don't think I've pre-drawn a sketch on paper for a piece ever, certainly not in the past 10 years. So the pencil, I'll have an eraser, maybe some sandpaper, and I'll just start laying things out freehand on the paper, seeing what works. And from there, trying to make my lines a little more permanent by carving them in, and little by little working the depth in. So I'll start with a tool where I'll just add an actual physical line to the pencil line, and then I'll just gradually start to add depth and roundness to the form. And do a little bit of planning about how much deeper I want this area compared to the higher areas. A lot of times I'll actually eliminate some elements 3/4 of the way through. So this represents probably a couple days worth of work. I'll get started on it, I'll put it down, I'll come back to it, I'll have more ideas. And then when I'm done with this, then begins the color. And it's a really difficult phase to enter with these pieces because I've done so much work to get to this point. I'll get this perfectly carved and perfectly vivid the whole way through. And it really is a giant leap to go then and to add color and to risk producing something that I'm not happy with, because things happen really quickly. This is a slower phase of the work, the carving, and then once you start adding color, things really start to speed up again. And you know, I can just be high-fiving myself when things work out, but when they don't, I just take a deep breath and say, okay, you got a couple hours to clean that up and start over. And that's part of the process. So, but it really is important to me to take that risk and to see what happens. I can't be afraid to ruin pieces. And looking at this more even-toned carving, this is a piece I did last year, and I thought I was done last year. This piece was initially about the same color as this, so it was a light cream and an even-toned piece of wood. And then I realized I really did need to add more depth. So what's happened here is I've laid on colors of various tones of brown over the whole piece, and then I can sort of wipe them clean again, and the darker pigments of the glazes and the tints will stay in the cracks and crevices, but I'll be like acting like the stream itself, and I'll be wiping off the color off the highs, so that when we look at this piece, pretty much no matter where it is, it doesn't have to have perfect light. It's still going to tell its story. You know, I do have a background in botany, so I try to sort of suppress my inner purist about carving real grasses that actually exist in real life. And for the most part, I'm true to nature, but I also like to invent seed heads as well, just because the carving tool moves so well with them. When I carve grass, the first step is just a blank piece of wood, and I have my pencil in my hand, and I'm really just doing a super loose, open sketch and just trying to feel for how the wind's moving the grass. And as often as not, just those first casual, sort of expressive pencil strokes, they end up being very close to what the final carving looks like. So I'll do some loose sketches, then I'll go over them and try to preserve them a little bit so they don't get lost in the process. And then I start to remove wood with tools that are shaped like a V at the top, and they create a nice little crevice for light and shadow to creep in. So I'll just be coming right in, and it's almost like braiding hair, just going back and forth all the way across for each little seed head. It almost becomes a meditation after a while, just coming in and dividing up the form with your V-parting tool. So this one has a very shallow, narrow profile where you can really get in deep and create that little space where you're creating a line of light and dark. This does have some color in it, but what really makes my pieces work is to use the available light and create the line from light and shadow. And that's the driving force behind my choices. So this is another example of a piece that I thought I was done. It was all bare wood, and I came back to it again and realized that color would be a huge improvement. So for this piece, I've actually just used regular watercolor paints and mixed them right on the wood. Sometimes I mix them with a little bit of shellac to help solidify them. But I love sunflowers. They're another charismatic plant. And I've done mirror frames with sunflowers. And the whole sunflower, the flower theme for me is part of what I was doing when I first started carving. Now, when I first started, one of my goals was to see how much detail I could actually achieve. I had just started experimenting with this form, and I wasn't sure of the limitations yet. So I started carving mirror frames with the most challenging flowers I could think of. I had sunflowers, I had lupine, I had clusters of asters, And I tried to achieve as much detail as I could because I was so struck by how light and shadow played on carved wood. So again, adding color is a whole nother layer to that process. I've carved 5 wolves over the past 10 or 12 years. They're a dream for me. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I've wanted to bring a wolf to life. I was one of those kids that spent years trying to figure out how to draw a wolf, how to create the back leg, how to proportion the head properly with the rest of the body. It's a pretty special animal to me. I grew up in the East Coast where we don't have a lot of wolves, and they were super mysterious to me, and they still are. A question that I get a lot when people see my life-size wolves is how do you even approach a 3D animal? Where do you begin creating a 3-dimensional, lifelike moving form out of wood? And I guess I have to say there's two reasons. I mean, there's two things that are working in my favor to help me do that. One is I have confidence in my hands and in my eyes, and that sort of started probably when I was 9 or 10 years old. Just in the school that I went to, they gave me a couple carving tools and a piece of wood and said, you can carve a spoon out of this, and they showed me how to do it. And ever since then, I've just had that confidence that I know my hands can take me to the completion of this project. A really practical way to approach something as challenging as a life-size animal is to break it down into a side view. So anytime you have a 3D sculpture, of course you do have a full-on side view of it, and you can create the side profile of it to begin with. So you can just bite off small pieces at a time, and then from the side view you can then look down on the top and create the vertical view, and you can integrate all the different points of view on it. Of course, this isn't just one piece of wood. The grain on this piece is running vertically, and it's an assembly. It's an assemblage of wood. So I've got a series of glue lines. This initially came from 6x12 lodgepole pine logs. So I've got a series of vertical joints going through the piece. Sometimes you can see them if you look closely, but it's a vertical assembly, and that's how it starts. I'll have a lot of negative spaces to begin with. I won't have the first part of the glue up come all the way down there. I'll have negative spaces to begin with, and then from there, that's when I get really covered with sawdust, because out comes all the messy tools for roughing that in, you know. I'll have electric chainsaws, gas chainsaws, angle grinders, and then of course bigger hand tools with mallets, and start the journey. Well, this is one of those really pivotal, special times in my journey through all this. I've been at this for a long time. It's pretty special to have my own show. I mean, I'm sharing it with Maureen as well, but she's really helped me step forward and step into the light with this show. And I'm really excited. I have a lot of support from this community. I have a lot of support from my family.